You can't just walk away from this!
Remove your hand from me right now. I am doing my job, and you need to back away.
This isn't over.
The first punch never landed. That was the last thing any of those 4 men expected, and the last mistake the loudest of them would ever make in broad daylight. It happened on a warm Saturday afternoon in Virginia Beach, Virginia, in the wide-open stretch of Mercy Park, where the fountain hissed softly and joggers moved in lazy loops around the gravel path. Grace Calloway had just finished a brutal double shift at Centara Memorial Hospital, still dressed in her pale blue scrubs, her blonde hair pinned back, dark circles under her eyes that told the story of 36 hours spent saving strangers' lives without a single word of thanks. She wasn't looking for trouble. She never did. She simply wanted 5 quiet minutes by the fountain before driving home to an empty apartment and a cat named Biscuit who didn't care what kind of day she'd had, only that she was home. She didn't know that trouble had already found her, wearing a leather jacket and a grudge 3 years old. Marcus Doyle spotted her from across the path and felt something cold twist in his chest. 3 years earlier, his younger brother had died on a table in the ICU, and in his grief-shattered mind, he had built a villain out of the nurse who called the time of death. He didn't know, or didn't want to know, that Grace had fought for that boy for 11 straight hours, that she had been the last person on this earth to hold his hand and tell him he was safe. Grief has a cruel way of needing somewhere to go, and Marcus had aimed his for 3 long years, waiting for a day like this one. He crossed the path with his friends trailing behind him, Tyler, Brandon, and Wes, young men who didn't know the real story, who only knew their friend was hurting and had told them enough half-truths to make them angry on his behalf. "Get that, nurse," Marcus growled, low and venomous, and it was Tyler who repeated it louder, turning heads across the park. "Get that, nurse." If this story means something to you already, if you believe people deserve a chance to be truly seen before they're judged, hit like on this video right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a reminder that kindness is strength, and subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will change the way you see the quiet people in your life. Grace turned at the sound of her title spoken like a slur. She recognized Marcus instantly, remembered the funeral she'd attended without telling his family, remembered standing at the back of the church in her only black dress because she never forgot a single patient, especially not the one she couldn't save. She had spent 3 years hoping he'd found peace. Instead, peace had found her, wearing for angry faces and closing distance fast. She didn't run. Nurses don't run from wounds, they walk toward them. But this was different. Marcus reached her first, grabbing her shoulder hard enough to spin her half around, his fingers pressing bruises into skin that had, unknown to him, survived far worse than a grown man's grip. "You took my brother from me," he said, voice cracking with old, unhealed pain. Behind him, Tyler and Brandon laughed the ugly laugh of young men who mistake cruelty for courage, while Wes lingered a step back, uncertain, the first crack of doubt already forming on his face. What none of them knew, what nobody in that park knew except a florist named Rosalind who had once seen Grace carry a wounded stray dog 3 miles without breaking a sweat, was that before Grace Calloway became a trauma nurse, she had been Petty Officer First Class Grace Calloway of the United States Navy, one of the first women to complete an elite special operations medical program so grueling that most men never finished it. She had served 2 silent tours nobody would ever read about in a newspaper, had pulled wounded teammates out of gunfire in places whose names never made the evening news, had earned a chest full of ribbons she kept folded in a drawer because she didn't need anyone to know. She had traded a life of combat for a life of healing because she believed the fight worth having now was the one against suffering itself, one patient at a time. She never spoke of it. Not to co-workers, not to friends, not even to the man she'd once almost married. She simply carried it, quietly, the way the strongest people often carry the heaviest things. So when Marcus's grip tightened and Tyler stepped in close enough to shove her, something in Grace's body remembered before her mind caught up. It wasn't rage. It was training, muscle memory built from years of discipline, and beneath it, something far gentler than these men deserved: restraint. She could have ended the confrontation in under 4 seconds. Instead, she raised both hands, not to strike, but to still the air between them, and said, in a voice that didn't shake, that this wasn't going to go the way they thought. Tyler laughed and reached for her again, and that was when Grace moved. It wasn't violent. It wasn't cruel. It was precise, economical, the kind of motion born from a decade of training your body not to waste a single ounce of force. She redirected his grab, turned her hip, and in one fluid motion had him off balance and sitting hard on the gravel path before he understood what had happened. Brandon rushed forward next, and Grace simply stepped aside, letting his own momentum carry him past her, guiding him gently but firmly into the grass. She never threw a punch. She never needed to. Every movement said the same thing without a single word: I am not the woman you think I am, and I do not want to hurt you. The onlookers who had gathered, an elderly man and his family, a group of joggers who'd stopped mid-stride, stood frozen, some filming, all stunned into silence. Marcus stared at his 2 friends sprawled on the ground, then at the woman standing calmly in front of him, breathing steady, eyes not angry but achingly sad. I'm not your enemy, Marcus, she said quietly, and something about the way she said his name, gently, like she'd said it 100 times before at a hospital bedside, cracked something open in him. I sat with your brother for 11 hours. I called his mother myself because I couldn't let her hear it from a stranger. I have never once forgotten his face. Marcus's hands began to shake, the leather jacket suddenly too heavy, the anger that had armored him for 3 years dissolving into something rawer and more painful, grief, finally unguarded, finally seen. He sank to his knees on the gravel, not from any strike, but from the sheer weight of finally understanding that the person he'd hated hardest was the same person who had cared the most. Wes moved first, kneeling beside his friend, placing a hand on his shoulder, while Tyler and Brandon picked themselves up from the grass, quiet now, the laughter long gone from their faces. Grace knelt down too, ignoring the small crowd, ignoring the phone still recording, and spoke softly to Marcus about the night his brother passed, filling in gaps in a story he'd never let himself hear because it hurt too much to listen. She told him how his brother had asked, near the end, whether his big brother would be proud of him, and how she had promised him that he would be, always. Marcus wept there in the open park, unashamed, 3 years of misplaced anger finally finding its true shape, unbearable loss, and nowhere safe to put it, until now. In the weeks that followed, word of what happened in Mercy Park spread through the city, not because of the takedown, though that video did circulate, but because of what came after. Marcus began volunteering at Centara Memorial, first quietly, then publicly, speaking to grieving families about how easy it is to aim pain at the wrong target when your heart is broken. Tyler and Brandon, humbled and changed, started a small non-profit alongside him, raising funds for the families of ICU patients so no one else would carry silent debts of grief the way Marcus had. Grace never asked for credit. She returned to her 12-hour shifts, her quiet apartment, her cat named Biscuit, content in the knowledge that healing, whether on a battlefield or beside a hospital bed or in the middle of a sunlit park, always starts the same way, with someone brave enough to choose gentleness when they had every justification not to. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that the quietest people you meet are often carrying the heaviest, bravest histories, please take a moment right now to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Real strength rarely announces itself, and real forgiveness is one of the hardest, most powerful things a wounded heart can offer. Before we go, I want to ask you something. Comment below with one word that describes what you felt watching Grace's story unfold, whether it was pride, tears, chills, or hope. I read every single one, and I promise you, they matter more than you know. Grace Calloway never wore her medals in public. She never told her story unless it was to comfort someone else's pain. But that Saturday in the park, without ever raising her voice or her fists in anger, she taught for grown men, and an entire city watching through their phone screens, that the truest kind of strength has always been the kind that chooses mercy first. And somewhere across Virginia Beach, a little boy's memory finally found peace, carried gently home by the very woman his brother had once tried to destroy.